So the polls have closed in Georgia. The results are coming in pretty fast. To help us understand how much is riding on this, I'm joined by David Frum, senior editor at The Atlantic, Aisha Mills, Democratic strategist and former fellow at the Harvard Institute of Politics. Thank you both. It is great to see you again. There's so much to talk about. Aisha, I'd like to get right in there with you if we can. If we put the mechanics of this race aside just for a moment, what is the story of this election day in Georgia so far? What are you seeing that speaks to something broader about that state or this moment?
I got to say right now at this moment, it looks like we are going to have our first ever graduate of a historically black college and university in the United States Senate. It's looking really good for Raphael Warnock. And that is really just a microcosm of what's happening in America writ large with the demographic shift that we've been seeing over the last decade or so. The bigger picture here is that the Deep South is not as red and as conservative as it once was because we've seen a migration of highly educated people move from the North back home to the South. We have a large African-American population there that is mobilized, engaged, has been organizing for 4, 5, 6 years, and so they're turning out in record numbers. And then you also just have an environment where the Republican Party has made things so toxic that it's really difficult to associate yourself with them, even if you have conservative values. And so there's just a big sea change underway in the United States generally, and Georgia is a microcosm of that.
So, David, is that your takeaway from Georgia? What do you see as the story there?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of truth to what Aisha just said. I mean, this is very much, Donald Trump insisted that this be a referendum on him personally, and he got his wish. It's a referendum on him personally. Normally, special elections after a general go against the party in power. I mean, every Canadian who's watched a by-election understands that. You win big, you lose the next by-election, and that's what normally would have happened here. But Donald Trump said, this is about ratifying my attempt to overthrow the 2020 election, and Georgians of all races and backgrounds said, it looks like they have said in the majority, no. It's important to understand what has not happened here. President Biden or President-elect Biden has not gained the ability to pass any program he wants. This will still be quite a conservative Senate that he will face, even if the Democrats win both seats. But he does now have the power to organize the Senate. He can ensure that he will get votes on his proposals. He will be able to get the cabinet that he wants, and he'll be able to get most of the judges that he wants.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I do think that the shorthand of this race that people are quick to repeat is that, mathematically, if Democrats win both seats, they control the Senate, the vice president casting the deciding vote. Basically, that's the end of the story. But clearly, that description misses something fundamental, right, David?
Well, it misses the fact that the Democratic Party is not as liberal a party as the Republican Party is, as conservative a party. And it's not as obedient to its head as the Republican Party is. So there will probably be 42, 44 quite liberal Democratic senators, but there'll be 8 to 6 more Democratic senators who aren't that liberal. And if Ossoff and Warnock want to keep their seats, they probably won't be as liberal as a lot of people are suggesting tonight. So Biden will have a power to organize, but he will not be able to pass hugely ambitious progressive legislation, it doesn't look like.
Aisha, do you think he'll be able to do that?
I think we need to think about what the priorities are at hand right now. And this is certainly not a situation where, say, the very, very progressive Bernie Sanders wing of the Senate thinks that they're going to ram through new legislation. That's not what's happening here. This election in Georgia, first of all, one of the key issues was criminal justice reform. We are now in a position where the House passed a significant policing measure for the first time with police accountability. So now if the Senate changes, the Senate has an opportunity to do the same thing. And the conservative senators, the more conservative senators, those who come from Georgia and otherwise, absolutely would support a measure like that, whether you call it progressive or not, because it's something that they ran on. It's fundamentally core to the campaign. We're also in a place where we've got to deal with COVID-19. I mean, the United States is worse than the world. We've got over 350,000 people dead and dying right now. That is all about economic relief. It's about our healthcare system. It's about a lot of things that have nothing to do with conservative versus liberal, but the ability for Joe Biden to get in, solve problems, govern, and have the Senate be expeditious in moving the measures that we need to fund the things that we need to fund to get America back on track. So I think that, yes, it may be true that, we may not have a Green New Deal in the first term of this new Senate, but there are so many other things that are consequential to the American public that are going to happen now if the Democrats have control.
So I have to say, as outsiders, as Canadians, we watch President Trump continue to allege election fraud, and every time he does, the crowds go wild. And there's a temptation for many to say, that's kind of a fringe view. But then there are these recent polls that show about 3/4 of Republicans believe there was widespread fraud in the U.S. election. This isn't a fringe view, that this is who they are. So I'm wondering, David, if we can begin with you, what does that say to you about the Republican Party?
Well, let's do the arithmetic. About 22% of Americans identify as Republicans, about 35% identify as Democrats. So if you have 75% of 22%, you got a lot of Americans, but you don't have anything like a governing majority. What Donald Trump has done has to get intense support from a smaller and smaller minority, while losing the traditional heartlands of the Republican Party among college graduates in the suburbs, all the places the Democrats are winning tonight. Those are the places where Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush governed from. Affluent, educated suburbs that were socially moderate and fiscally conservative.
But 77%, though, I mean, I hear the math. You say 22%.
It's 77% of 22%. So do the math. That's not
right.
Good.
Okay. So, Aisha, we know tomorrow, I mean, obviously is a huge day in D.C. There are expectations, I suppose, of armed protesters, Congress certifying the Electoral College vote with some Republican objectors. What's your sense of how what happens tonight could change the state of play in D.C. tomorrow?
Listen, this threat of armed protesters and all these white supremacists that are running the streets and causing havoc, and people who are, lining up in support of Donald Trump and threatening violence, they are doing it out of desperation. This is the final act for them. Georgia is slipping through their fingers at this point. And I think that the win here that we see is really going to quell a bit of the energy and enthusiasm for those protests, because there's nowhere for them to go now. Congress is going to overwhelmingly seat, or I should say, state that Joe Biden is the president of the United States. That's just going to happen. They're going to certify that. And there's nothing else for Trump to do, and there are no other elections to influence. There are no other states to try to pull strings in. So I think that a lot of this is the quote-unquote threat. It's good fodder, but at the end of the day, there have been a number of occasions when there was an expectation that a lot of people were going to show out on the conservative side, and then it ended up being that the National Mall was empty and there were no protests, because, at what point does it deflate the energy of the radicals on the right? Are they really going to Washington to march? We'll see. I don't think so.
All right. Thank you, you two. I could talk to you all night, but we do not have any more time. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.